I didn't do anything unless you did it first. It always took me so long to like get like my personality out to people. Yes. I was like, you mean I don't have to go to school anymore? Of course I don't want to do that. Of course we'll be homeschooled. That was another instance. I remember this very clearly of like you being the more outgoing one. Was that all just a feeling kind of thing? And like the
Hmm.
feeling's gone now. So like, is my faith gone? Like this kind of thing. To me, that was like a sign kind of thing. It's like,
Yeah.
take me out in the water and
Yeah.
where I have to trust you. And I was like, okay, here we go. Let's just move and not
Hmm.
have anything going for us.
That's so funny, the audacity to just be like, all right, God's gonna take care of it, I guess. He told us later, he's like, I was planning on breaking the police barricade and getting myself martyred for the cause. Like he was planning to die that night. And we just got surrounded by people that were pissed off, dude. And they come in ready to fight the cops. Like they come in, knock over the barricades, and the cops like get in with their riot gear because they knew it was coming, like get into a line and whatnot. All of a sudden, right before we were supposed to move into it, she's like, "Yeah, I don't want to be married anymore." Out of left field, mind you. Now we had our issues, but I never saw that coming.
Well, I don't even remember how long after we broke up, but I told him about that.
Yeah.
And he was just like, what? He's like, dude, that is like one of the craziest things I've ever heard. Like, people don't do that.
I've seen too much to never not believe, but I can't, I can't have you close right now. So, guys, welcome to the Fringe Faith Podcast. My name is Thomas,
I'm Joseph.
and we're brothers. And I think today we're going to get into our testimonies. Talk a little bit about our past. Who are we? Where did we come from? Obviously, the same womb. Joseph got a
It's true.
hand-me-down.
Also true, I guess.
Yeah, it's a weird way to say it, but whatever. But we both come from Indiana. That's true whether you're spelling Indiana or my mother's name, Diana.
Yeah.
So now that we got the really bad jokes out of the way. Oh man. So I don't know how we want to do this necessarily. Like, should we just go back to like way back and talk about time frames as if we were both going through them or whatever at the same time and go bounce back and forth or what?
It started when I saw the light. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
The
we just
doctor
go.
slapped me on the butt.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll just go and see what
Right on.
happens.
Right on. Well, I know that. So before you probably would remember much, mom and dad started going to church there in Morristown where we grew up. And I remember going to like, have vague memories of like children's church and stuff. So obviously we've been going since, at least you were pretty much right after you were born, I think. I don't know if my parents went before that or not, but we went there and I even into my, early like preteens and stuff like that, we were going there. And I remember Ross was my youth pastor. I got
Hmm.
baptized around that time. I probably would have been like between 10 and 12. I don't know.
Yeah, he baptized
Um,
me too.
did he?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't remember. So I think this is actually gonna be interesting because I haven't thought about the fact that like you and I lived different experiences this whole like that whole time.
I know.
Even in like our teen years and stuff, and realizing that like you have probably a different perspective on a lot of this stuff, which is actually
Yeah.
kind of cool. Uh,
Almost anytime we talk about past stuff, like there's stuff that you don't remember or you like, we're like, it was like that or what? So,
yep,
yeah.
yep, yeah, it's pretty funny. But yeah, I remember getting baptized by him. I don't remember a lot. I don't remember a ton from that time, other than like in middle school, because we both went to public school until end of my, I guess, eighth grade year, right before I would have become a freshman. I was like
Yeah.
picked on super hard in middle school. And I remember Ross was sort of our like my counselor at the time too. We talked to him, like we'd go to him a lot whenever I was dealing with stuff, you know. I quit Boy Scouts because of it and all that stuff. I barely even remember going to Boy Scouts, but
Yeah.
I realized like that probably informed a lot of my later years. Because I remember once we started homeschooling, so I don't know what grade you would have been in, but
Third.
yeah, I went to like we probably both basically did, but I went to having basically no friends and would still go to that church occasionally, but we at that time lived far enough away that I don't know that we went all the time. Um, I don't know. Do you remember anything specific from that time at all?
Uh, my only memories from Morristown are very vague, few and far between. I remember VBS. What there
Mhm.
was like a VBS we did because I just remember like arts and crafts and like I won a belching contest at that church, which they gave is so funny.
Yeah,
Our mom and dad talking about how they could hear me from the other side of the church.
that's funny.
Um, yeah, I remember Ross. I don't know. There's not too many from Morristown in
Yeah,
general. Just like even when we lived there, I had just like bits and pieces because
yeah,
I was
yeah.
when I was pretty young back then. Probably. I mean, we moved to Morristown when I before I was born, and then we moved from Morristown when I was five. I think five or
Hmm.
six. So I don't have a lot
Yeah,
of memories from then.
yeah, but we still went to that church for a handful of years later, I think, because we didn't start going to Park Chapel in Greenfield until I would have been like ninth grade, I think. Um,
It, that sounds about right. Because I remember, I was I think right before middle school because that was like the age group when we started going to Park Chapel because
mhm,
that was the youth group that we went to was
mhm.
or the age group that I was around was middle schoolers.
That makes sense. Yeah, yeah, because I mean, yeah, you might have done like kids' church like for a year or two before that, right?
I
Maybe,
think so, something like that.
but either way, that's funny that I think I do remember you getting baptized around the same time. I feel like it's the typical older brother, younger brother thing where I got baptized and then all of a sudden you were like, I want to too.
Probably, probably.
Yep.
But I'm assuming it was something similar to that. That happened a lot throughout life.
Uh-huh. Yeah, dude. That's funny because I didn't realize like thinking about it that you were on my coattails as much as I think you remember being. But
Oh yeah, I mean it was I literally like almost I didn't do anything unless you did it first. And even going back before I could even remember, mom telling a story about grandpa and how intimidating he was to me apparently when I was like really little.
yeah.
And like I don't remember what she said, probably like I was a few years old before I ever even really
Hmm.
like hugged him. And
Okay.
I guess one time we went over there for Christmas and you ran up to grandpa and gave him a big hug and that was enough for me. I was like, okay, I guess he's cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
He was an intimidating man.
yes, he was.
He was a big guy and very loud.
Yeah.
But that's funny. Yeah, no. So anyways, I guess yeah, I guess Park Chapel's where things start to actually like formulate in my brain as far as memories go. But yeah, we were going to like non-denominational churches and stuff. But I remember even back then, dude, I was getting into like theological conversations. That point in time, I couldn't tell you what they were about. I just remember us getting into the weeds about stuff often. Like we'd go into a Bible verse or something and be talking about stuff and we'd get into philosophy like crazy. Um like a lot of us back then and that's something that I think was relatively common in millennials maybe. I don't know if, you know, other generations have a similar experience, but like I just remember the handful of my friends and stuff, we'd even be hanging out before church a lot of times because I was a part of the worship team, and so we'd get there sometimes really early and before even the first like service or whatever, and we just sit there and talk about theological stuff. Um, I remember even back then, but those were pretty formative years because, especially once we started homeschooling, it was like basically where I got the majority of my socializing. So
Yeah.
I spent, 3, 4 days a week at the church at some point, whether it be worship practice or something else.
Yeah.
Um, but even back then, I was pretty interested in like the theological stuff. And I remember, our worship pastor Chris would sit and take time to actually like invest into us and stuff. And another thing from back then is I always ended up somehow like I've always rubbed shoulders with like the leaders of pretty much anything that I've been a part of, and
Yeah.
it was I don't think it was ever really intentional. Um, but it's just something that I've noticed as I've looked back at life, like something about the way God designed me. I end up rubbing shoulders with whoever's running whatever we're doing. Some people would probably go like, "Well, you probably got some sort of pride thing, whatever," and I just wasn't. It wasn't that. It was. I think it was just wanting to be known. I think like a big part of my thing was being misunderstood by most people, and so I think wanting to be known and understood by whoever was, in charge. I think that probably just felt safe, but
Yeah. I think my perspective on that is just like you were always looking for somewhere to like to attach yourself to and like belong. Like you just like were constantly looking for that.
yeah,
And living in the middle of nowhere and being
cornfields.
homeschooled, that was, yeah, you were
Hmm.
just constantly looking for that. So you were always trying to find something to attach yourself to and trying to find like your identity pretty much kind of.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually exactly what it was. I mean, I remember feeling, even with the handful of friends that I had, I always felt like I wasn't really known or understood. And back then, it had to do a lot with like my music style choices and the fact that most people either like sort of like picked fun at or like just didn't enjoy it or whatever. And I was like, but it's so passion filled and it's so whatever. And it's like this and whatever. And other stuff. Like I've always been a big personality. And I've always been overwhelming for most people. Dude, like, I remember even being so wanting of connection that I would meet people and basically dump the majority of my life story on them just because I wanted them to understand.
Yeah.
I'd be like, yeah, I was homeschooled, but because of this and because of that, like this is why I was homeschooled because the air quality at the school was bad and, and like I want you to understand that I'm not actually that weird and coincidentally making myself be really freaking weird.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, I would do that to people and I remember just like constantly being like, I want somebody to understand me. Um, but that was like my entire teen years, and you and I, especially in those years, dude, we'd get into fights all the time because I was just so just pissed off at the world and depressed and upset, and me and mom would constantly fight because I think we just misunderstood each other so bad. Um, and I was headstrong and she was headstrong, and if I didn't understand something like if they wouldn't explain it to me. I think, thinking about this, and I told mom this, I think the fact that we got the because I said so often, it like made me go like, what you like, I don't think I processed it this way back then, but I realize now I'm like, I probably processed that like, oh, you don't respect me enough to give me an answer like what feels like a legitimate answer, and so I feel like I can't respect you for giving such a what felt like a lazy answer a lot of times. And I told mom that a few years ago. She was like, oh, I'm sorry about that. I was like, no, it's okay, I get it, like I get that dealing with somebody that's constantly pushing back can get exhausting, and you don't even want to have an
Yeah.
answer. You just want to be like, shut up and leave me alone.
That's funny.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're so similar in so many ways, but we're also like the complete opposite in a lot of ways. Because
Hmm.
I was like, feel like I was very carefree and like I don't know. I learned so much from just watching you.
Hmm.
Like I don't know. I was like I had that yearning to like be understood and like wanting to like meet people or whatever, but I also like I was I feel like I was very aware rather than like how you said you would just like meet people and you just tell them everything.
Hmm.
I don't even maybe it was I don't even have this connection in my like brain or whatever that like I saw you doing that and like so I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that or whatever. But like
Right.
I it always took me so long to like get like my personality out to people. Like
Uh-huh.
um yeah, I was just very conscious of like what people were thinking and like
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it's like body language type thing, but I feel like I've been able to I'm like pretty good at reading people like so I like was very careful of how I came off to people
Yep.
and like I'm just like making sure I don't even know if it was just like me being fake or whatever. I don't know if it's that, but like
Mm.
I was just like I would navigate things a little differently kind of.
Yeah. Well, you were a little less extroverted on the one hand. On the other hand, I think, we've talked about this before, but you had more like performance anxieties type things, and you didn't want to shake the boat as much as I did.
Oh yeah.
And
I
honestly, probably watching me shake the boat probably made you go, I don't even want to try.
yeah, maybe. Yeah. That probably some like subconscious level. There's something
Hmm.
to that, but
Yeah. I mean, dad and you have pretty similar personality types, and he's pretty much similar way. So
yeah.
that, it makes sense. Um, but yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So then I guess, yeah, after I had graduated and stuff, I mean, actually right before well, I guess technically I graduated at 16, so this is actually after. But around the time before I turned 18, we, for whatever reason, had started going to Xenox with Pastor B, Brandon.
Hmm.
And I think at that point, he and I had a misunderstanding of it was like a difference in language kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember getting super offended by him. But my thing was, I came from a culture where it was like, yeah, I want to play on the worship team. But that didn't mean like, oh, I'm trying to perform in front of everybody and like, look at my skills kind of a thing. It was like, yeah, I want to be on the worship team is what that meant. And for him, because of the way that he translated and how he saw the world, he saw that as like, oh, you just want to perform in front of people, so I'm not going to put you on the worship team kind of thing. But we never had that conversation. So it was like misunderstandings. Then
Yeah.
he like said something. I remember we were on like a worship retreat or something. He said something that like rubbed me so wrong that I literally just like I was like, I'm done. I'm not I was so mad. So much so that after like I moved out for a year. Yeah, dude, that's crazy. Yeah, I moved out for a year and I was still searching so hard that I ended up dating the well, we'll get into it. Why not? The first girl that I lost my virginity to when I was 18. And that was weird. Like I was kind of coerced into it because of her depression. Uh, it was not healthy. But she would like convince me to come over at night when she was feeling like super depressed and stuff. And then, she would push the lines. She didn't have the same like dynamic of faith and everything. So, anyway, that was like a messy year when I moved out. And right before I moved out, you remember you were like, you and I got into it about something, and you were like, "Oh, you just leave already."
Yep. Exactly that. We were
Yep.
screaming at each other about something. I was just because that was that right before you moved. Like that was um like the build up. Like
Yep.
finally, like we were just like constantly at each other,
Yep.
and it's so funny because like how close we are now. It's like how did that even
Oh,
happen? But it's
yeah.
just just being young and not even like one, not understanding each other,
Yep.
and two, not even understanding ourselves.
Yep.
So
Yep. I didn't I didn't get any of it. I didn't understand why I was so upset all the time. I just knew that I wasn't and or that I was so upset and I don't know, man. That was a wild time. But yeah, I spent a year living, outside of the house and then circumstances sort of forced me to move back home and dynamics changed with me and mom and dad enough that there weren't really any, it wasn't really that turbulent anymore, other than the times that you and her would get into it and I would back you up instead of her. She would get so mad, dude.
yeah.
But yeah, and then I remember, like I said, the conflict with Pastor B was so intense that I actually like would try to go back to that church and on Sundays and I was so mad that I couldn't like contain myself during the services and stuff. I'd just be so upset. So I actually ended up reaching out to B and being like, hey man, can we sit down and talk? Like I gotta get some stuff off my chest or whatever. He didn't even remember the situation really. He was like, dude, I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
we ended up, uh figuring that out. He invited me to come be because I was over 18 at that point. I was 19, I guess. He was like, why don't you come and, help out at one of our youth events? And if you want to, then maybe you can, serve on, as a youth leader or whatever. And I remember that's when faith for me went from like I mean, it was in my heart a little bit, but it was a lot of head knowledge, and it was almost this sort of. It went from sort of like yeah, faith will inform what I do, but it's not the priority to, oh no, this is actually the most important thing, and everything else will just fall in behind that. And that's when that season happened. But yeah, if you want to interject your whole time around then.
Yeah. So yeah. So Morristown, I don't have too many crazy memories of. Park Chapel was I remember quite a bit from Park Chapel,
Hmm.
um, in Greenfield. Uh, the youth group there, um, the friends and stuff, but it was more like just like fun time, kind
Hmm.
of. Like I was in middle school and just that was like like you said, it was the being homeschooled that was like the
Yeah.
social interaction. So that's what that was to me. And I also I was young enough to I went to the co-op. I don't know if you ever did that.
Nope. Nope.
The yeah.
All
So
my
mom,
homeschooling was like an online school that I did in like two years, and it was all of high school in like two
yeah.
years.
Yeah. So yeah, I remember like being so excited to be homeschooled. And then like mom was like, yeah, Thomas has been getting sick because like there's like mold or something in the
Uh-huh.
school. And they were like, it was like the end of a semester or something like that. She's like, what do you guys think about like being homeschooled, not going back? And I was just like, yes. I was like, you mean I don't have to go to school anymore? Of course I don't want to do that. Of course we'll be homeschooled.
Yeah.
But like thinking back, like you were probably like you at that point you were old enough, like you had like set friends and stuff probably.
Yep.
But for
Yep.
me, it was just like, yeah, that sounds awesome. I can
Yeah.
just stay home. And she's like, yeah, we'll do school and I guess we'll figure it out as we go. And I was like, okay.
Nice.
um, yeah, Park Chapel was more of just like, I mean, just in being in that environment was like really good for me just because like just Jesus centered or whatever, but it wasn't
Hmm.
really like I never really like even I was baptized when I was younger too from Ross,
Yep.
but it's just like it was just the motions kind of thing. Typical like just growing up and knowing
Yep.
it in your brain but not in your heart or whatever. And
Yep.
then we went to Charity, and that was Xenox. And we actually went there because I don't know if you remember, it was the mom and dad were in the CMA,
Oh yeah, Christian
and
Motorcyclist
it
Association.
was it was a biker Sunday,
Mm-hmm.
so that's why we went there. All the bikers were there,
Oh yeah.
and that was another instance. I remember this very clearly of like you being the more outgoing one because we get there and they were like non-denominational, I guess, but with like Pentecostal roots. So like they were a little bit more
Yep.
eccentric, and all the kids, the youth would go down to the front in our first Sunday there, and I don't remember if somebody asked or if it was just like we saw them going up there, and
They probably asked us to.
you just like went, and I was like, nah. I was
Yeah.
like, I'm good. And I remember I stayed with mom the whole time. I was like, yeah, I'm not going up there. I'm not doing
Yeah.
that. Like, no way. And then we met some people afterwards because like you like all of that was just because you were just like ready to meet people.
Dude, and dude, remember, like, thinking back on this, a lot of that was like, dude, I wanted a relationship so bad that a lot of times I would literally go to do things just so that it was like, maybe I'll meet somebody.
Yeah.
I
That's
just
funny.
remembered that. That's hilarious.
That's awesome. But yeah, like literally. So, I mean, if you weren't who you are, we would have
Yep.
went that Sunday. We would have just done the whole thing. They had like a dinner after that we went to or whatever
Hmm.
at the park. But I mean, we would have just went. We probably would have went home, and I would have never seen any of those guys again. But you were
Yep.
just like immediately you met like so many people. I remember we met Alex. Um, we don't have
Yep.
to
Yep.
whatever, but um, just so many people, and like you were getting like so you're just the out there guy. So
Yep.
like you were meeting everybody, and I'm just there like following you around. I'm like, hi, I'm Thomas's brother, and um, yeah, they were like, yeah, we do youth group on Saturdays, and
Uh-huh.
this was when we were in Bogstown,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it was like an hour drive to
Hmm.
this church on the south side of town, and we did it like that next Saturday. We're like, yeah, we'll be there. And I
Yeah.
think you were in the truck at that time too.
Probably.
Yeah.
Jankety
Jank,
truck with a
jank
custom
truck. Yep.
tailgate,
Plywood
plywood.
tailgate. So good. But yeah, we did it. And um, that's where, like you said, like it just, that's where things really started to kick off and like
Yep.
real relationships started forming.
Uh-huh.
And, but like, yeah, just, it's so funny that all those people like you met first and like you were
Uh-huh.
building trying to build these relationships, and then like you were the one who like got hurt by Pastor Brandon or
Oh, yeah,
whatever,
yeah, yeah.
and like I just kept going. I don't even remember, do you like how long were you going there before that?
I
Like,
don't know. We went for a handful of months, long enough for me to like actually invested in going to a worship school and stuff like that.
yeah, did
Um,
we move because we were Bogstown for a year because
nope,
we
no,
okay,
because
so
I
you
went,
stopped
well,
because you would have had to because I kept going and there's no way you would have drove me an
no,
hour.
yeah, no, I think you're right. I think we would have moved over to that area,
Yeah.
and then I think I quit going.
Which how crazy is that we ended up moving like 15 minutes down the road?
Dude, that is actually kind of crazy. And what's funny is it was our grandparents' house that they couldn't sell yet.
Yeah, that's wild.
So it just worked out where you ended up right there when I stopped going. But yeah, I stopped
Mm-hmm.
going for like a year and you kept going.
Yeah,
And then your best buddy came
yeah.
Rodney.
Oh yeah, Rodney.
Yep.
Which is so funny because like I just all these talks of like you like wanting to do. You were like, let's start a band, and then
Yeah.
like all this stuff, and then I'm right there, and then
Yep.
somehow we like I just like I don't know. I said this in my best man speech, but it's just like so true. Like so many things in my life are because just I was just like following you along. And like
Yeah.
I just had it was happenstance that I was just there and like, oh, now I'm friends with these people. And like
Yeah.
now I'm really close to these people. Like I never would have met them if it was just me because I don't say hi to people. Um, but yeah, that was Xenox was like forming faith pretty much for me. And like,
Yep.
okay, like this I'm like feeling something here. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
the worship nights and stuff like that were just always pretty intense. Not always, but most of the time. And what was really cool is they had like one or two songs where they would actually bring somebody on and have them actually scream a part on it,
mm-hmm.
because metalcore was the thing then, which is
Oh
funny
yeah.
because I wasn't even that into metalcore until, a couple years, or until like I came back, and that's when I started getting into it. But
No.
yeah,
Well,
it was,
that was the scene there too.
yeah,
Like that everybody was into it, it seemed
yeah.
like at
Half the
least a little
guys had the
bit.
Bieber haircut. You had the
Yeah.
Bieber haircut.
Yep.
They just had long, dumb hair.
Yeah. Constantly doing this over and over
Shaved
and over again.
faced. Yep. Yep. We tried to keep it straight because I didn't like how
Uh-huh.
poofy it would get.
Yeah.
Yep. So funny. But yeah, dude. And that was a pretty formative time for both of us, obviously. I mean, even Pastor Brandon did like a boot camp thing every year, and I only went as like a leader once. Did you go more than once?
Three times. Yeah. We went the first year and uh it was like it was supposed to not be boot camp. He was like, yeah, we're just getting together. It's gonna be a little different this time. And we get there and right away boot camp, by the way, for any everybody is it was like their youth retreat. It was like a week long thing they did, but it was at the church. And pretty much it was just like a military boot camp.
Yep.
They took all the clocks out of the building so you didn't know what time it was. They like treated you like you were in the military. So it was like you're standing at attention, you were like doing push-ups, running.
Yep.
The whole gist of it was like break you down physically so they can or like reach you spiritually kind of
Build
thing.
you
It's
up
just like
spiritually.
let's
Yeah.
get you down. Yeah, it was pretty cool. But yeah, I went the 3 years, I think.
Oh, did you?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The idea of the boot camp was basically to it was like break you down physically, also create a bit of what's the word I'm looking for? I use it all the time, but my brain isn't braining. Discipline.
Yeah.
Create a little bit of discipline, but also to kind of build you back up spiritually. There were memorization of the Bible verses and stuff like that. There were worship times where and intentional like what was it devotional times in the morning and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah.
Dude, the year that we did it, that I did it as a lead, we actually somehow created an extra day by giving you guys like 2 hours of sleep, waking you up, and all the windows were like taped over or whatever, so like you guys couldn't tell it was dark outside and stuff.
Yeah. I do remember that. I remember like waking up and I felt so rested because you just didn't know what time
Hmm.
it was ever. And so you woke up, it's like, oh, we're here we are again. Let's do this. We're up, whatever. And yeah, it's
Yeah,
hilarious.
it
But
was crazy though.
I remember the whistle. You had a whistle the whole
Oh, I
time.
did.
That was the thing. Everybody, I
Me
remember there
being
was a
annoying.
couple of the guys that tried to like steal it from you.
Yeah, I think I was pissing people off with my whistle.
Yeah. Because when you guys were intentionally just like trying to like egg us on. I feel like you,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. But there was an obstacle course and everything. It was pretty sweet.
yeah,
But yeah, it was cool. Those years were cool because it was just like intense. Looking back, I mean, you and I have talked about this a few times, but some of our friends, they kind of just either walked away from the faith, or maybe they didn't fully, but a lot of them were like, man, he was too intense and he was too whatever. I always was like, no, he's just calling us to excellence. And even though it might have been a little intense sometimes, and even in my case, maybe there were some misunderstandings sometimes, like ultimately, I don't have any issues with how he did his ministering. I felt like, other than us getting like me misunderstanding him and getting bullheaded about it. Other than that, like, dude, he facilitated a really beautiful culture of excellence and of actually encountering the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's just all perspective type things. People just had
Hmm.
different experiences with it. Mine were always positive, and
Right.
he was just a very good leader to
Hmm.
both of us.
Yep.
And
And he'd
so,
shoot
yeah.
straight. He'd shoot straight.
Yeah.
Like if you were living in sin or if you were, walking a path that, you knew was contrary to the Bible, he'd shoot straight with you. And, I know the worship team people, he'd be like, all right, well, like I'm gonna pull you from the worship team for a couple weeks, as like a, hey, it was sort of his idea was like, hey, if I don't want people looking at you going, I know what you're doing, and yet you're still, whatever. There's sort of this thing of like, hey, like I'm showing that certain expectations, if not met, there are consequences to your actions and sort of a thing. And it wasn't a vindictive thing. It wasn't even it was more of a, hey, you're a what's the word? You're an influence
Yeah.
and I want that to mean something. So that was a great few years, however long that was. And then when they ended up stepping down because they had dreams of something else, of building a youth center that and stuff, that was kind of what they tried to go after that. Um, dude, I don't know about you, but I felt like, man, what am I gonna do now? Um, because at that point we now lived on the opposite side of town. It was like an hour away from most of our friends, 45 minutes from most of our friends. And, trying to figure the youth group was great there. The church was kind of hard for us to connect in, I feel like, on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah. I mean, it just, for me personally, it was this conflict in for me of like, was that all just a feeling kind of thing? And like the
Hmm.
feeling's gone now. So like, is my faith gone? Like this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, um, yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy how impactful that was for me. That like the years between then and like when I met Ashlyn, which
Yeah.
who's my wife, is like they're like almost a little bit of a blur.
Really.
Um, yeah, I don't know. It's just like I went from like being young and like passion filled with like
Hmm.
zeal for the Lord to where I was just like, okay, now I'm like I'm becoming an adult and like life's
Yeah.
just life and like yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can recall a bunch of stuff, obviously,
Right.
but like
Right.
it just
As far
seemed
as
like I was just kind of
spiritually
like
goes.
I was just kind of doing whatever kind
Yeah.
of thing. At least at that time frame when they left, it was just like, and uh, I was in my first ever relationship for like over a year, right around that same time.
Oh,
Like
yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
broke up like right after, and I remember being like, what was I like 17 probably or something, and my like
Probably.
that was just devastating,
Yeah. Yep.
um, but but I mean, looking back now, it's like you you were a child. What are you talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But
Obviously, but it's still, I mean,
yeah,
that much time invested in something, regardless of, how young you are, that it's still rough once it ends, whether it's a
yeah,
relationship or something else.
for sure.
But yeah, dude, that's crazy. I actually hadn't really thought about that because I mean, I relatively soon after reconnected with Eric. He was a like music missionary sort of thing with his wife, Jillian. And I remember them from the Park Chapel days. And I somehow connected with them because they were starting a church up in Carmel. And I actually helped for like the better part of a year, probably helping them with a church plant. But I remember just thinking, like, man, because it was very non-denominational, it was very seeker friendly. It wasn't very like spirit filled the way that I felt like Xenox was. And even though Xenox wasn't like, Charity Church was relatively Pentecostal, and you might see people doing weird stuff in Sunday morning services. Saturday, it was just really intense worship. It wasn't like people manifesting in weird ways like a lot of charismatic cultures do. It was just more of
Yeah.
like a genuine, strong heart cry. And I was like, man, I need that. Like I felt like I was like, I, I, I felt like I was doing injustice by serving at something that didn't have that, and I couldn't influence bringing it about in any way. And I remember that's when Eric was like, dude, you need to meet JT. So JT, he was also in my wedding party. He is a evangelistic, like in the streets type missionary guy. Who before I met him would go out on the weekends and evangelize, like, and he's a loud dude. He would go down Broad Ripple where all the bars are, and he would just, street preach, but not like what when people think street preacher, they think like fire and brimstone, like whatever. No, it was like Jesus loves you and this and that, and it was like really powerful stuff. And they'd have drum circles and stuff because he's a drummer, and they'd have drum circles and stuff doing like stomp type stuff and drawing in a crowd, and then he'd like preach to people and stuff. It was crazy, but and he used to say that he'd just about every time he'd go out, he'd encounter somebody that had like a demon in him that would like come to him and
Yeah.
like confront him. But he's just an intense man, tall black man that's just a powerhouse. And so I I found out that he was doing small group little gatherings at his house like once a week. And I just showed up. I think I knew somebody that was going there, but I just showed up. And from then on, man, I was like hanging on to his coattails, like just gleaning from him. And I remember not too long after, it was probably only a couple months after I met him, I went up to Detroit for a big event with him. And it's funny because I actually had a dream that weekend that like he was like really old and I was still like doing stuff with him. And I just felt like that was super significant. And ever since then, I think back to that often. I'm like, I feel like I'm gonna be hanging on to his coattails for the rest of my life, kind of a thing
Yeah.
on some level. But yeah, man, then we'd do like ministry in Indy. He ended up taking over the House of Prayer and we sort of built it into something a little bit. I served on that for a long time. And yeah, I mean, I remember involving you a couple times in that. Like, I think we did worship a few times,
Yeah.
together. Um,
I forget a lot about those times, which is funny. Like how you talk about sometimes you forget about a lot of the stuff earlier on. Like
yep.
I forgot about all that, like the prayer house kind of stuff, which
Yeah.
those were good times.
Yeah. You weren't nearly as involved, obviously. Like
Yeah.
I was also doing small group with like Hannah and Luke and David and all them, and which eventually went from meeting at a vineyard, which I had started going to, and started meeting in Hannah and Luke's house. And it kind of became almost a house church sort of. But that was a beautiful time. But like we'd all those were the days when I could not sleep and still be okay. But we'd stay up till like 2 a.m. at whatever that, all the 24-hour place was and have breakfast foods and just stay up talking about
Waffle
the
House.
Lord and talking. It wasn't that one, it was a different one. It was I'll think of it, but
Yeah.
it wasn't one that you would think of. Um But we'd go and we'd just talk about the Lord and talk about, theological stuff and talk about all sorts of stuff. But that was a beautiful time for me because that's when I started feeling like I was getting community a little bit. I still felt misunderstood a little bit. But I was getting community and we'd meet, a couple times a week and we were doing the house of prayer stuff. And it was so beautiful. And I became really close with them. Luke, he was also one of my groomsmen, and that was awesome because that was also pretty formative. And JT ended up telling me, he's like, dude, I feel like you should do YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission for anybody that doesn't know. And yeah, I ended up going to do that school. It's 3 months of training. I did it in the training in Hawaii, and then 3 months of missions, and I did that in Fiji. Before everybody goes, oh, missions in Fiji must be nice. Way more third world than you think, and we spent no time at the beach. So, and it was hot. so hot. Um, and there wasn't hardly any protein in the food half the time. It was a lot of carbs, so I was constantly hungry. So it wasn't as easy as everybody thinks it would have been. Um, but it was cool because that was also pretty formative in that, I started to actually see, a little bit more as far as miracles go. And, I got to be in kind of just like a pressure cooker kind of thing spiritually. And then when I
Yeah.
came back, that's when I had been dating somebody. I thought I was going to move to Washington. That didn't go. That like kind of went to crap. I thought I was going to marry that girl. That went to crap. And you and I, a few months later, decided that we should try to move to California.
Uh-huh.
So we sold a bunch of stuff, drove to LA, went to a conference thing, and I felt like the Lord was like, I said go. I didn't say move. But that's just the wild faith that I had at the time. I
Yeah.
was just like, yeah, all right, well, I feel like God's saying to go, so I'm gonna move there.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, like trying to remember that kind of stuff, like from those years or whatever. I remember being just like, I don't know, as far as faith goes, like I was just kind of like wandering a little bit, and like I would get
Hmm.
glimpses of like these moments, but it went back to that like, oh, this is, am I like just feeling something here, like is this
Hmm.
just like an emotional response to something, like especially music, because like I've always loved music,
Yep.
so any like good worship, whatever you want to, however
Yep.
you want to say that, whatever, would always get me, but then it would just like go away or whatever.
Hmm.
But I do remember the whole like moving to California thing. For
Yep.
me, like for you, I remember it was like because Hannah and Luke were gonna do that too.
Yep. They did later.
They did, yeah. But like for me, it was just like not doing anything else. Like
Right.
I don't have, like I was like my brother's moving, like
Yeah.
I have like really close friends and everything like that. So like that part was hard. Like I was gonna
Yeah.
leave all these people, but I was just like I was borrowing like your faith and your
Yeah.
like zeal. I was like, okay, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. Let's just like
Yeah.
live on the edge, kind
Yeah.
of. And it was right around, I remember it was right around this time Oceans came out by Hillsong.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, to me, that was like a sign kind of thing. It was like,
Yeah.
take me out in the water and
Yeah.
where I have to trust you. And I was like, okay, here we go. Let's just move and not
Hmm.
have anything going for us.
Dude, yeah. Yeah, that was wild. That's so funny, the audacity to just be like, all right, God's gonna take care of it, I guess.
Uh huh. Yep.
But
And that
that
I felt that even though like I've always had faith and like I've never been like a like left the faith or whatever you want to say, but like I
yeah.
was just like didn't really think I was super close at that point in time, but I was just like you just had so much passion for it. And I was like, heck yeah,
Uh-huh.
let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, for sure. Yeah. So that was wild. And then, you
Because
know,
we were there for like what? It was like 3 weeks or something like that.
something like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
wasn't terribly long. It was long enough where like we were like, I don't know what we're gonna do. We only got so much money left. Like we gotta figure
Yeah.
this out. And that's when I sort of felt like the Lord was like, I said go. I didn't necessarily say move. And so we were like, all right, well, I guess we'll go back.
Yeah.
So we went back and I I I was just working a sort of a cleaning job at the time. I think you went back to McAllister's or whatever, and then Ferguson happened. And for those that don't know what I mean by that, 2014. So I did YWAM in 2013. We tried to move like in like I think it was like April or May 2014. And then fall 2014 is when Mike Brown got shot and Ferguson went up in an uproar. And JT heard from the Lord basically like to go and do something there. And so he went and ended up meeting with people and got this revelation that they should do like a worship, prayer and worship tent for 21 days in the midst of it all. And so there's these protests. There's even like there's riots even happening and stuff. And he's like, I'm gonna go do this thing. We're gonna do 21-day prayer and worship tent. I was like, all right, well, hey job, I'm going. Sorry, but I'm leaving. I'll probably be back at the end of it, I guess.
Oh,
So I left for a month and we did this thing and God showed up in so many ways. It's crazy. I remember one lady was like gonna do an abortion. She walked by the prayer tent, got prayer and decided not to. One guy was practicing witchcraft against us and we like perceived it and then we confirmed it later, but he was like doing witchcraft against us and like trying to curse us or whatever, but we were praying against it and one of our girls ended up just being like, hey, I feel like the Lord's told me to pray for your knee. He's like, how do you know about that? She's like, well, I just was praying for you, and like I felt like the Lord said that your knee hurts, and yeah, I should pray for it. He's like, yeah, it's been messed up for a while, and I haven't told anybody. So she does. He gets healed in his knee, and then she's like, well, what about your hip or whatever? And he ends up like, yeah, I think my hip's pretty messed up too. Just dude gets fully healed, and he just gets like wrecked because that night he said he was like. I was planning on, he told us later, he's like, I was planning on breaking the police barricade and getting myself martyred for the cause. Like he was planning to die that night.
no,
And the Lord just wrecked him and he was still there after we left, but the police thought that he was with us because, he's just around our group and they were like, "Hey, thanks for what you're doing and whatnot." And he just was like, "Whoa," he just felt
no,
all this love and generosity and stuff. So the next time we ran into him, JT's like, "Tonight's your night." He's like, "You need to know the Lord." And he's like, "I've been looking for like the Lord's been talking to me and I've refused it." I said, "If you want me, you got to come at me in a way I understand." He's like, "And I understood that."
yeah, that's
So
awesome.
that was cool. And then we ended up getting in the middle of a massive protest of probably like 600 people. I keep downplaying it to like 400. JT's like, no, it was more than that. But we got in the middle well, we got there before then because they were marching to the police station. And I had my acoustic guitar. Another guy had a djembe. And then it was JT and maybe like three or four other people. And we just got surrounded by people that were pissed off, dude. And they come in ready to fight the cops. Like they come in, knock over the barricades, and the cops like get in with their riot gear because they knew it was coming, like get into a line and whatnot. But, JT said he's like one of the event organizers for the protest came up to him and were like, you guys need to like knock it off because we can't even get a chant going. Mind you, it's like five or six of us. I'm loud, but I ain't that loud. But we're
Yeah,
apparently loud enough that people later told us they could hear us on the edge of the protest lines, um, over some of most of the protesters. And we're just getting amplified apparently. And they couldn't get a chant going. They're getting pissed off and they're like, "What side are you on?" JT goes, "We're on the Lord's side." And they're like mad about it or whatever. But it was funny because some people would be dancing over because they'd hear the music and then they'd hear what we were singing about Jesus. And they're like, what? What
yeah.
is this? Right? And so at some point, one of the organizers gets pissed off, and she had been cursing the cops every time we've seen her, just super pissed off. And she just, for some reason, hands the microphone to JT. And I swear to you, dude, no quicker than him saying the name Jesus as he starts to like speak out what he was going to speak about, like the justice of Jesus and no justice without Jesus kind of thing. And he starts going in on this, and it's like the crowd went from an 11 to like a 4 immediately, dude. Like they just like fizzled. It was like the atmosphere completely shifted. They decided to cross the street for some reason. And they're just like, well, I guess this is done. So they all kind of cross back to the other side of the street. The police come out a little further just to make sure or whatever. And some dude throws a bottle, tries to start something. The cops like do a pincer move or whatever to go into the crowd, grab him, and then it was just done. It was about 100 and then it got funnier. About 100 of them were like, "Let's march!" So they go off down the road. They had never gone as far as the tent before. They go to the tent. They're walking by and they're like, "What are you guys doing here?" And they're like, oh, we pray to Jesus or whatever. Pray and worship. Some protester goes, everybody in the tent, we need Jesus. So like 50 of them end up staying, something like that, end up staying, and like one of the guys ends up preaching to him and whatnot. And dude, it was just hilarious. It was just wild, dude. Like God just showed up and like JT said in his speech at the wedding, he's like, it was like kind of Old Testament, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just, man, it was so powerful. I remember being so marked by that season. It was like a month of just insanity. And I got back home, and JT and his wife Molly were planning on moving to Ferguson, and I was like, I'm going to too. But I was like, but I want to like devote a little bit of time. So at this point, Pastor Brandon from Xenox had moved up to Minnesota and was a youth pastor there. Because he like they felt like they were taking a detour or whatever, and they felt like they should just go up there because they got offered the job or whatever. So I decided I wanted to do a 40-day fast of just liquids and read through the entire Bible. So I asked them if I could go to them so I wouldn't be home and distracted and everything. So I did that January 1st, the next year, 2015. And I remember two things happened. One, I was just kind of frustrated with like how my life had gone. I was like, because I always had these aspirations of being a musician and of being a touring musician and like doing that whole thing. And it had never happened. And I was frustrated with that. And Brandon, he told me, he goes, man, the thing about you is you've always been an asset to everything you put your hands to. The problem is you're always looking past it and you never become more than that. And I was like, oh, that hit me deep. I was like, man, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to invest in something only to bail later because I'm, looking at this big dream that I've had since I was, 14, 15. And honestly, it was the thing that kept me going during my most depressed years as a teenager. It was like
Yeah.
I was always thinking like I'm gonna have a band and I'm gonna tour and I'm gonna whatever. And I'd get so pissed off when people would be like, "You need a plan B." Be like, "I don't need a plan B, dude. I just need to freaking." But
Yeah.
unfortunately, like nobody in the area wanted to be in a band with me, nobody ever took the time to be like, hey, well, what about doing other things in the meantime? Or what about, I felt like, people constantly like would push against it instead of like trying to help me guide me through it. You know what I mean? And because
Yeah.
I'm the way that I am, if you're pushing against me, I'm just gonna push back.
Yeah.
So I felt like I never got the guidance I needed to be successful in that area. And man, I was just like, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I remember hitting up, I remember hitting up Rodney and being like, hey man, I want to start a band. Do you want to do this? I was like, because if I come back home, I want to go after this thing. And he was like, yeah. And I actually think you were in on it too.
Hmm.
And I come back and I was like, okay, I'm not going to do any ministry for a while. I'm stepping out of that. I'm going to get a big boy job and I'm going to go after this music thing. And I remember we like jammed a couple times and then it was just like, yeah, I don't want to really do this anymore. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I remember being so mad because I was like, I gave up, all this other stuff so that I could do this. And now it's not happening. And I was so frustrated. But I had gotten a job at the McAllisters you were at. And yeah, I don't know if there was anything in that time that you wanted to fill in the gaps on, but
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think of some stuff while you were talking while also trying to listen.
yeah.
But yeah, so let's see, where did I last leave off? Was like the after of Xenox, kind of like what I
Hmm.
was, and then
A little bit of a
doing
house prayer
like
time.
House of Prayer, kind of being involved in that, but not really. I
Yep.
remember like just kind of working and existing pretty much.
Yep.
But I did probably one of the most impactful things for me as far as like, well, I'll just get into it, I guess. But like I got in a relationship with a
Hmm.
girl who I had known for a long time. And it was like one of those things where I like always had a crush on her. And then it finally happened. And I was like, oh, this is like the best thing ever
Hmm.
type situation. And this was probably Man, time frames are weird. But
Yeah, I don't even know when that would have been.
it was probably around the time where you were right before or right after you did your fast, I think,
Hmm.
around that same time, because it was after we came back from California. But I just remember it was like it felt like it was going to be it kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um, but like she wasn't a believer, and
yeah,
like even at that point in my life, I was just like I was a little bit like, oh, I wasn't hardcore anymore. You could say whatever you want to say, but like
yeah.
I just tried to ignore it. I was like, okay, this is gonna be fine. And
I've done that
um
entirely too many times as well.
yeah, well, I just so yeah, I don't know how much I want to get into or whatever, but it was just like that ate away at me. So
Hmm.
like I ended it ultimately. Like that's what happened because I was like, this I can't because it was going in a trajectory where it was gonna be serious enough to where I was like, okay, like I gotta confront this now.
Yep.
Like I could try to be one of those guys that's like, oh, like I'll just get her there, you know what I mean? Like I'll get her to
Yep.
believe and like but I was like, that's almost never works.
Yeah.
And
And it's
then
manipulative and it's not
and her
good.
faith would be completely based on like it would be I would be part of the farm foundation and then if whatever.
Hmm. Yep.
And so it was like, yeah, like I'm doing the right thing here. But it sucked. And I
Yeah.
was like, because like it was just, yeah, it was like the ugly relationship thing. And we ended on like a high note. Like it was just kind of out of the blue. I like completely blindsided her. And like
Hmm.
I actually thinking back on it now, I'm like, that was like probably the worst way ever to be like broken up with. Is like
Mm.
because like it seemed like everything was fine, but I was just like, hey, like I've been thinking about this and like yeah, it was just the whole thing. But
Yeah. Like I can't get
um
past this. This is too important to
yeah.
me.
Yeah, like it may not even seem like it because I'm not really living it, but like this is like deep in who I am as a person. It's like faith and like I I believe in Jesus and like yeah,
Yeah.
we we were on a trajectory to where we were going to have sex and that was like a big deal for me. I was like
Hmm.
I if we keep going down this path it's going to happen and I'm like I was
Yeah.
still virgin and I was like this is like a big deal for me.
Yeah.
Um so that ended and then I became kind of jaded at God because I was like why did you make me do that?
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like so there was a few years there like I guess that was probably like the worst time for me as far as like emotionally and spiritually of
Hmm.
just like okay whatever like I did that now what like my life's over kind of thing. um but I don't know it's just like just kind of I was just like I put my faith to the side like I don't know like I was
Yeah.
just angry that like I had this relationship it was like everything I wanted but like I had to end it because of you and like I don't
Yeah.
know like that those types of feelings
Yeah.
anyways but yeah so I eventually I don't even know what the time frames there were or whatever but Pastor Brandon actually had a conversation with me at one point I don't even remember how long after we broke up but I told him about that
Yeah.
and he was just like what he's like dude he's like that is like one of the craziest things I've ever heard. Like people don't do that. It's
Yeah.
like you like had this relationship that you like wanted for a long time because like knew her and like had a crush on her
Yeah.
and it was like
Yeah.
whatever fairy tale kind of thing. And he was like, and you like walked away because of Jesus. He's like, that's awesome. Like that's
Hmm.
crazy that you did that. He's like, I don't think I could have done that.
Right.
And I don't know, like that helped a little bit. I just remember being like, okay, like, and I knew that I did the right thing
Yeah.
and like but it still sucked. And but fast forward, I don't even know. So I was like, I don't know, 19, 20-ish. Again, like I the timeline of things is a little bit
Yeah.
confusing there for me, but I ended up move, moving in with Rodney
Uh-huh.
and his I don't know if they were engaged at that time or whatever. They're married now. Whatever. I moved in with them in on the south side of town. And then like 2 months later, so this was probably a couple years after the other
Yeah.
relationship, I think. I think it was two or three.
Well,
I don't know.
that would have been you were living with them when I was around the time that I was married,
Yes.
which we haven't
Okay.
gotten to yet.
Yeah. So we
But
can
you no, you're I mean you're good. You can keep going. I can fill in the
yeah.
blank later.
Um, but it was like 2 months into moving on the south side of town. Um, I got asked if I wanted to basically go on a blind date with some uh friends, kind of
Yeah.
however whatever you say there.
Yeah, yeah.
And we
It
met
was a
at
blind double date.
blind double date,
That's
yeah.
what you mean. Yeah.
So a guy I worked with, his girlfriend at the time, they're now married. Um, they she so I worked with him and we were at a Halloween party at the place we worked. And she meets me and like pretty quickly she's like, "Are you single?" She's like, "I have a friend that I think you would be like perfect for."
That's awesome.
And of course, me being like awkward and whatever, I was like, "Oh no, I'm not looking for anybody right now." Like, she's like, "Are you like interested in dating anyone?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not really looking." And in my head, I'm saying this as like, no, I'm not looking, but like I'm open to anything. But then it just like was dropped immediately, and I was like, oh, okay. So we just like it like didn't really come up again.
Yeah.
Um, and then I remember kind of being bummed because she like showed me a picture and everything, and I was like, oh, okay. So like nothing happened. And then a couple months after that, uh, she followed me on Instagram.
Uh,
Ashlyn did, and I remember texting Kyle, and I was like, "Hey, what's this all about?" or whatever. I was like, "They're like stalking me on Instagram now," and I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Let's just do it. Let's start. Let's go on a date or
yeah.
whatever." And it's like I'd only dated two people before then, and I
Hmm.
just remember being really nervous or whatever. But yeah, so we go on a blind double date, and I just remember I was like, she's just awesome right off the get. And I was like, I gotta get to know this person more. Like
Yeah.
there's something here. Like this everything like weaving in and out of like the lead up to it was just like too perfect. I was like,
Hmm.
we gotta get to know each other. So
Yeah.
that's how I met my wife time, but we can kind of
We can backtrack a little. Right, so to fill in the blanks there on my end, I had mentioned going to the McAllisters that you were at, and that actually at that time was like I had moved back into mom and dad's or whatever at some point, and you were still there, and my ex-wife, she she started working with us, and apparently she liked me, but I thought she was into you at first, but apparently she was hanging out with you to get closer to me. Which is hilarious. But yeah, there was like I ended up, finding myself interested in her, but I think part of it was too, I had been so fed up with like searching for somebody and I was still feeling like relatively misunderstood and wanting to be known and had really craved a relationship enough that I was like, yeah, all right, I'll get into this relationship. But I didn't take it. I did like I took it sort of seriously, but I was also like, she doesn't believe and whatnot. And I remember actually taking her to church with me because she just was like, yeah, I'll go with you. Like, I want to hang out with you. Like, I'll do whatever. And she ended up meeting the Lord there. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, great. Then we can keep going with this relationship kind of thing. Because I had a similar, mindset, obviously, of like I shouldn't marry somebody that that doesn't believe. Um, but she was pretty rambunctious. She like I remember like thinking back now that I'm healed, like one of the things that drew me to her was the fact that she didn't take herself too seriously. And at that time, I always did. Like I took myself way too seriously. And she had like a sort of zest or like what's the word, free will or like I don't know. There was like like a
Free
way that
spirited or
there it is. That's the word, free spirited way about her that I like adored at the time and wanted for myself. I just never got there while we were together. Um, but yeah, like fast forward, we got married. But she was originally from Australia. Her mom and her, she grew up with her mom over there. That relationship was super turbulent, so she had issues there. She had moved over here to get to know her dad that she had barely ever met in her life. And that relationship got turbulent because of her stepmom, I guess. And so much so that her dad was like, I'm not coming to your wedding to teach you a lesson, kind of a thing.
no.
And so she ended up having just extreme, mental health issues right at the gate once we got married. And it was bad enough that within a year, we decided to sell everything, go bankrupt on my debts, and just try to move to Australia because I was like, um, my mindset was that that she would be more comfortable where she grew up, because she was living in a different country. Things were a lot different here. I was like, maybe her being back there will help her settle, right? And so we did that. Got screwed over by her mom. We leaned way too heavily on her mom. Um, we got kind of screwed over there. And so we were only there for a handful of months. Sort of a pattern there, at least it seems. Um, and we ended up coming back. Well, she obviously, in the state of mind that she already was still in a bad place. But the I will say that the Australia thing was good on a couple reasons. Because one, I did feel like the Lord was on it a little bit, where I was like, okay, I need you to make the way. He sort of did. And I actually involved in a house church there that taught me a lot and kind of helped mold my perspective on how the church should and shouldn't function a little bit. That said, we came back, and within a handful of months, like the Lord blessed the crap out of us. I got a free truck. I was able to buy her a car in like a handful of months. We both got better jobs than we had had prior. Um, and things were looking good. We were supposed to move into an apartment. We were just waiting for it to open up. And all of a sudden, right before we were supposed to move into it, she's like, yeah, I don't want to be married anymore. Out of left field, mind you. Now, we had our issues, but I never saw that coming. Um, and most of our issues were more her trying to process what she was going through and me being there for her when she's crying on the bathroom floor kind of stuff. Um, but I was like, that came out of nowhere. Found out she, a week later, calls me bawling and was like, I cheated on you, kind of a thing. And I was like, I'm willing to forgive it, right? So she comes home for a minute, but then she's like, this is too overwhelming for me. I'm gonna go stay with my girlfriend. I was like, okay, I kind of get it, but I'm also not gonna try to push you. I get it. Like everything's so turbulent that I don't know what to do. Turns out she'd gone back to the dude, and I remember being so pissed, that I was like ready to end it, like, end the relationship and whatnot. But I ended up having a conversation my with some friends of mine. They owned a gym, and they were like, we've actually been there. Um, they had said basically that he left her for somebody, but they had kids, they had a business together, they had like a house together, they had all that stuff. So they couldn't like completely just justify immediately like splitting and everything. But she chose to fight for their relationship for like, I think it was like just under a year or more. And I remember the conviction in her eyes was like, the Lord can redeem it. So I'm going to fight for it. And they told me that story, and I was like, all right, I believe it. So I chose to do the same. And I basically told her, I was like, listen, if you want to file, you can file, but I'm willing to reconcile if you will. And that was like 6 of the hardest months of my life. I remember fasting during that time. I remember, just constantly praying, but I was going through it. I was like, how do I do this? They're having to constantly coach me to like, don't overwhelm her. She's broken. She's not thinking rationally. Don't overwhelm her with your stuff. You've got to, deal with this stuff, on your own and with people that are around you, kind of a thing. And I learned a lot about how broken people think through that process because, he would kind of be like, this is where my head was at during that time. And if somebody would have done this to me, then I would have reacted this way. I wasn't thinking rationally clearly. So like you can't approach it rationally when somebody's not thinking rationally, right? So I learned a ton about mental health and all that stuff during that time. And but after about 6 months, and it was actually like the day after our 2-year anniversary, she calls me and is like, hey, I need your information so I can file bankrupt or file for divorce. That's when I fell apart. And that was actually, I mean, I guess right before that was several months before you ended up getting married because it was that next, that was in, I guess it would have been like October or something like that when she filed, and it finalized in January because, like I said, we'd gone bankrupt, planning to never come back to America, or at least not for years. And so we
Yeah.
didn't have anything to split. We didn't have anything like that. Um, and I just went through it, dude. But yeah, I was just kind of going through it, and I remember, reaching out to you and being like, dude, I know you don't understand it, and you don't know how I'm feeling, but like, I need you to try more, even though I know you feel like, I know that you're trying, but you
Yeah.
also don't know what to do and how to try. And so, I just remember going through it, and, in that season, I actually started to like, because I was falling apart so much, I was kind of just like strong arming God or stiff arming God and being like, I've seen too much to never not believe, but I can't, uh, I can't have you close right now. And
Yeah.
that's when I started, like, I downloaded Tinder and I acted like a fool. Not like crazy amounts of stupidity, but like, anyways, I did sleep around a little bit after the divorce was finalized and stuff, but then, you got married and that was awesome. But I think it wasn't long after you got married, probably, that I was like, I want to do something different. But around that time, I started following Go Fast, Don't Die, started following Brady, the other groomsman, and he and I had some conversations. He went through a divorce that was pretty terrible several years or a handful of years prior, so we talked about that. Their whole ethos was beautiful. I loved what they were, putting out into the internet for mental health and stuff. And so I was like, dude, I'm gonna get a motorcycle. So I bought a motorcycle, was like, this is super freeing or whatever. And I was like, this is the dopest thing ever. And a year later, that's when I met them. And I found out they were going to be in Tennessee, went down, met them, rode with them for a long weekend. And I was like, I want to live that life. And so that's when I got the idea. I was like, the only way that I can make this work financially is if I buy a van, I convert it. Because at the time I was working in a metal fabrication shop, I can convert it and then I can go live on the road cheap, right? And then go live for a while. Because I had fallen apart. I was like, you know what? I've done a lot of cool stuff, but I don't feel like I've really lived, right? It's kind of how I felt. And so I did that. And built out the van, you had gotten married and stuff, and I was just like, I'm gonna go, right? I don't know if there's much that you want to fill in there. I don't want to go too long here, but
Yeah. I mean, as far as like getting married and all that, I'm sure we'll talk more about that kind of stuff in future
yep.
episodes or whatever. But pretty much, I guess, just to kind of leave off Um, where I was talking about that previous relationship was just like
Hmm.
it felt like it was what everything that I would want, except for it didn't have God and she
Yep.
wasn't a believer. And to meeting Ashlyn, my wife, and there's just
Hmm.
like it was like the completion of that. It was like, okay,
Yeah.
it's this is everything I wanted, and it's that.
Yeah.
And I remember going back to like talking to Pastor Brandon about that because I called him at one point to tell it because it was when I was gonna propose to her or whatever. I was like, hey, I don't know if you even remember this conversation we had, but like
Yeah.
you said that like one day you are gonna find everything and it's gonna be everything that you wanted. And that was it pretty much.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, I'm sure we'll go more into that like
Yeah.
in future episodes or whatever, but I don't want to go too long. But in closing, kind of for my testimony kind of thing, when I was thinking about like what is my testimony,
Yeah.
um like I've never had like that like growing up in church, especially you would hear all these testimonies of the people that were like they were in it, like they were
Hmm.
in this thing of like I was gonna die or I was like addicted to hardcore drugs and this, that, and the other. And
Yep.
like and then they had this boom God moment where
Yep.
like flipped their life around. And I was like, I weirdly want that. Like I
Yep.
kind of wish my life was like, I don't know. I wish I had
What
this
we
moment.
perceive to be as epic.
Yes, exactly. Like I was like, but like my life hasn't really been super crazy. Like I haven't had,
Hmm.
I've just like, when am I going to be marked by God in like this moment? And this
Hmm.
is a realization I actually came up with this week, or I didn't come up with it. It came to me.
Yep.
But I had this realization from God this week of like, he's like, I've been marking you your whole life. Like
Yeah.
as you've been going, like moments in your life, I like
Yeah.
everything
Wow.
you do is marks you in some way. Like
Yeah.
that's your testimony is like when, we didn't even get into this, but like addiction to porn, like
Yep.
throughout that fight, there was moments where I was marking you and like you getting healed from that. And like it,
Yeah.
and like the relationship, like, that was a mark of like, okay, now you know what you don't want.
Yep.
Just like life in general is just like this, that is your like becoming who you are. And it's like, and I'm going to continue doing it for the rest of your life. Like you're not going to have just like
Hmm.
one moment
Dude, for sure.
and searching for a moment of like, oh, boom, now I'm just like all in. It's like,
Yep.
no, it's just like, you're living and learning as you go.
Yeah.
So that was
That's
like,
awesome.
yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
my spiel for now.
Yeah. Yeah. And then yeah, you've been married and now you've got a kid
Yep.
and you guys are pretty involved in church and stuff. That's pretty dope, dude.
Yep.
Yep.
So
That's awesome. Well, yeah, so then I guess to kind of wrap up my thing, it might take me a little bit, but hopefully not too long
yeah, no,
because
you're good, man.
I don't want to go too late. I know it's like freaking 11 for you right now. But yeah, so I did the thing. I moved into the van. I went out to Wyoming and spent a year with the Go Fast dudes. That was awesome. I mean, it was exactly what I needed. Like, I do feel like the Lord was really in on that season, but I also just wasn't that um I guess zealous or even into it. Now, I guess 2020 kind of made me be like, "Oh, maybe I need to be a little bit more like I need to be more intentional, more whatever, because the couple years prior during the marriage and during the divorce and stuff, I'd kind of like pushed God away a little bit and because of the struggles, but then 2020 was like, oh, maybe it is really important. And I started to wake up to a lot of stuff, but we'll get into that later. But I was like, okay, it's important. 2021, I was living in Wyoming and I was living, but I was like, yeah, like my faith is a thing. Like it's really important, but I'm also not talking about it much. Not like I had, most of my life. Um, so much so that actually I feel like, I heard somebody had said at the wedding, they were like, I actually learned stuff about Thomas I didn't know because of the fact that like there was so much about, like the zealous faith times and stuff like that. I wasn't that as nearly as open about that stuff during that year. But I kept feeling like the Lord was like, I'm calling you back to the altar. And I was like, okay, what does that look like? I started going to churches towards the end of my time in Wyoming, and I was like, I'm trying to figure out what would that look like? What am I supposed to do? And then I sort of felt like the Lord was like tugging on me and being like, you're going to leave here and you're probably not going to come back. And he probably actually said, you're not coming back. But I didn't want to believe that because I was like, I want to live in Wyoming. Wyoming's awesome. Sheridan's great.
Yeah.
But then I got an opportunity to go make a ton more money doing videography. And that's what I had been doing for that year is I was doing videography for GoFast. They had some, like basically my contract ended. Um, and they couldn't redo it financially.
Yeah.
So I had been working at a brewery making beer for a few months. And then I got an opportunity to go up to northern Montana and Kalispell and work for a brand that I was like, yeah, dude, 5, 6 years ago, back when I first got into fitness, if I'd have gotten this opportunity, I'd have been all in on it. I'd have been like, yeah, go hard, hustle hard, grind, to the bone kind of mentality. But at this point in my life, I was like, yeah, I love this brand. It was Flag Nor Fail. It's like, I love this brand. I was like, I'm not as dedicated to that ethos, but like, I'll go and I want to see what it's like. Maybe it'll be great because it paid well and it was going to be an opportunity to be, rub shoulders with, somebody that I respected really well. Um, because I respected Rob like crazy. I still do. I respect the heck out of him. But you know, I realized after being there for a little bit, A, us trying to get on the same page as to what he wanted. What he wanted changed multiple times in the like 5 or 6 months that I was there. I don't even know if I was there a full 6 months, to be honest. But the few months that I was there, like the first month was like a trial run. I did a music video for them and different stuff, and they're like, "Yeah, this is great." And then, I want this. And then a month later, actually, I want to do this now. And it got to the point where it was like outside of my skill and it wasn't anything I had done before. And I was like, okay. And my vision versus his vision, they just weren't matching. And so I got to the point where I was like, yeah, I don't feel like this is right. So I'm not going to waste your time and money, and I'm not gonna, waste my time. It's a good thing I did because actually the day that I left, the snow hit and I was still living in the van, and I was like, that would have been rough. That would have been a rough winter. Um, Ended up chasing a relationship similar to the one you were talking about down to Texas because I was still pretty jaded and I was like, oh, this is like I'm really into this person and they're great. They don't believe what I believe, but like they're open to it. And so I can explain things and I can, whatever,
Yeah.
and we'll feel that out. And I was still very like, yeah, whatever. Like I've been married before, so what's the point kind of stuff. Like I still had some of those mindsets. That relationship ends, and I'm like, dude, what am I gonna do? I had talked to JT, or I had called JT, and I was like, dude, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like, I'm trying to figure it out. And I just had this feeling like I should figure out, like, I should talk with him because I hadn't really spent a lot of time talking with him or like processing with him in years, in a few years, at least not since, before I got married. And
Yeah.
he basically just goes, dude, why don't you come here to St. Louis, Ferguson, and see what God does. And I was like, all right, I'll do it. Of course, I spent most of my life trying to get out of the Midwest. So as soon as I got there, I was like, what did I do? This is stupid. I don't have any money to leave. Like, what am I doing here? I hate this. And it was funny because I was so angsty. I was so like, I was still pretty jaded about a lot of stuff, but I knew that God had called me back to the altar. I just didn't know what it looked like. I was like, okay, I'm only going to be here for a couple months. JT kept being like, it's going to be longer than that, I feel like. I was like, I don't want to
Yeah.
believe that. So a couple months after I got there, um, I had gotten a job doing construction again, which I did growing up with dad, and I had decided I was done with videography. I just didn't want to do it as a job anymore. And JT took me with him to a conference he was speaking at in San Francisco. And we went and we meet this guy that he knew. And the guy like just stops and says hey to him passing by. And then as soon as the guy walks away, JT looks at me and he goes, "That's why you're here." I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're here because he's here." He's like, "You need to talk to him later. He needs to pray for you." It's like, okay. Um, and we can get into it more later, but he ends up praying for me. And basically, long and the short of it is he essentially gives me this word about these horses and stuff. He's like, "You need to look up this word by," I think the guy is Bob Mumford or something like that. Anyways, he's like, "You need to look up this word." And it basically was just like, you need to stay where you're at for a little bit because this is a season of, getting ready to be, a sort of a horse in the chariot of the Lord kind of a thing. And I was like, all right, I get it. I'll stay. I ended up staying all of last year in Ferguson. And it's the first season where I was mostly by myself. I'd hang out with JT and their family, at least once a week. And then the guys that I worked with, I'd see. But other than that, I was pretty much by myself. Didn't really have any friends there. Didn't, in the few friends that I had from back when we did the Ferguson response, 9 years prior, I tried to hang out with them, but it never ended up panning out
Yeah.
the whole year, mind you. None of it, like I ended up not really hanging out with any of them. But it was good because, like I said, it's the first time I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. And the Lord met me so much during that time. And it was really purifying. JT even said, he's like, "You when you got here, you were one man. When you left, you were a very different man." And it was very marking. And the Lord told me during that time, well, basically, I was like, wow, it's been 9 years since I was here. And that was the last time I really did ministry. So it's been 9 years since I did ministry, even. And I'm back here. I looked up what the number nine in the Bible means, and it was completion. I was like, oh, so I've been in a 9 year cycle of completion. I look back and I'm like, wow, it really was like as hard and as crazy and as wild as those 9 years were, they were really formative for me. And I realize now that I'm like, I am much more the whole person that I'm was designed to be. Because before I was a lot more one dimensional. Now I'm much different, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
night and day, like I'm still the same guy in a lot of ways, but I'm like so much healthier, so much more full circle, all that stuff. All that to say, I met Emma, my wife, last year, because of Instagram, and we'll get into, that story later, on another podcast, but met her, friggin' fell hard, once I finally actually, pulled my head out of my butt. And started actually getting to know her and fell hard. Moved here in January out here in Redding, California, and we just got married uh, September 7th. Uh, it was awesome. I feel like the Lord was all over that wedding in so many ways, dude. Nothing went wrong, dude. Nothing
Yeah.
uh as far like then we even asked like, were there any big things? They were like, no, really. Like everything actually went off without a hitch. My allergies were bad that whole week, dude. That day, my allergies were like gone, non-existent up
Yeah.
until we drove off the property and all of a sudden my eyes started watering and getting itchy. But other than that, like my allergies were gone. It was almost like we got off the property and it was like all of a sudden I just hit a puff of pollen. But
Yeah.
it was wild. It was cool. And just having, you and then the bridesmaids that spoke and then JT that spoke, it was just like, because just I don't know, it was just really reaffirming for the people that didn't know me really well on her side. And it like I felt like the Lord was all over it. But all that to say is the last year was like really me. That's what I think the Lord meant by you're coming back. I'm bringing you back to the altar. And it was really me just like becoming unjaded in a lot of ways. And really, I guess the fire sort of went from, embers back to a full burning flame. Um, so much so that I feel like a lot of my Instagram followers are like, "What are you even on about now, dude? Like you were all about
Yeah.
living life and motorcycles, and now you're on about all this other stuff." I'm like, "Well, I used to be the same way. I just wasn't for a while, and now I'm that way again." So,
That's
yeah, man.
awesome.
So that's
It kind of
that's go ahead.
leads us here pretty much.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, now we're here.
Podcast.
So
So
I've been listening to podcasts. I've been learning a ton of stuff. So much so that I even want to learn Hebrew now.
yeah, that would be sick.
That would be, yeah. But yeah, now we're here and we're gonna do this thing and we'll see how it goes. But I think it'll be really cool. I think it's got potential for longevity. Like I said in the intro, we want to have guests. We want to talk about all sorts of stuff. We want to hear people's testimonies. I want to hear a lot. Like I think that's going to be a focal point for us as testimonies. But also, I want to have all sorts of conversations. So it'll be dope, dude. But
Yeah, so if you're still here, you know, after however long we've been talking,
yep.
thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Hopefully it wasn't too rambly,
Oh
but
yeah.
I mean, it's just so much to talk about. That's
Exactly.
what's going to be cool, I think. Just even rehashing a lot of that stuff, like going back and thinking about
Yep.
life and different moments and stuff. There's still a bunch to unpack there too. So,
hmm Yeah, dude. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for listening. If you made it this far, go ahead and, subscribe or whatever, I guess.
yeah,
Um,
however that works.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I'm figuring this out. I remember when you, me, and Rodney tried to do a podcast years ago, it was very different than the podcast world is now.
I bet. Yeah.
So I got to learn how to do all this stuff. I will put a little time into it, try to make it sound cool, with like maybe some music at certain parts and stuff, but and maybe try to come up with an intro and who knows, but
Yeah. We'll figure
I
it out as we go.
it'll be fun. I think right now we're just going to try to do maybe one every 2 weeks or something like that as far
Yeah.
as posting goes. Maybe we can record more than that, get a backlog. That'd be dope. But anyways, thanks for listening and we'll catch you later on the what am I even calling it? Fringe Faith
Fringe
Podcast.
faith. Yeah.
My
Let
mind
us
did
know
that
what
thing.
we'd call it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whatever we want.
exactly. I think it'll work. I think it makes
Yeah.
sense.
I like it. It's good.
Right.
Catchy.
Awesome. Well, see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.